Hello and welcome to this preview video of Act 4 of Romeo and Juliet. I teach this play to freshmen. I use the Folger edition, which is inexpensive and relatively well laid out. And these preview videos are meant for reinforcement. They're meant for if a student misses class and misses the discussion in the preview in class. Really, it's meant to help students feel competent and smart and aware as they're reading. I try to leave some stuff out and some stuff to discover. But I hope that these videos help you gain maybe an appreciation of some surprising moments, maybe a new appreciation of the iconic moments. And in this video is on Act 4. Now, Act 3, which was incredibly dynamic, involved the double murder, the murder of Mercutio and Tybalt. It tips the entire play. Romeo gets banished. Or if you want to say it like they do in the play, banished. I have a student named Ted, and classmate of his says, maybe your name should be Ted. But anyway, Romeo's banished, and they have one night together, Romeo and Juliet. But the challenge is that Juliet's father is moving up the wedding with Paris, and that's speeding the action. They have to make some very big decisions. So Juliet visits Friar Lawrence. And as I say to my students when you're watching these preview videos or where we have this discussion in class, mark up your book with these moments and as we discuss them, so that when you go and read the play, you're already sort of anchored in some key moments. Friar Lawrence, as we know from the very first time we meet him, where he says mickle are plants, like mighty, the power of plants. They can be either poison or medicine. That's the first thing we learn of him, actually, is his power with plants. So it isn't surprising then, several acts later, when he says to Juliet, when she sort of explains her problem, take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilling liquor drink thou of. So drink what's in the vial. And in this borrowed likeness of shrunk death, thou shalt continue 42 hours, and then awake as from a pleasant sleep. So the plan is, take the potion, fake your own death. You'll get put in your family's vault where all the dead Capulets go. And after 42 hours, everybody's gone, we'll rescue you and bring you to Romeo in the next town over, Mantua. What could go wrong, right? Secondly, Juliet, and I didn't talk about this in the last video, but in Act 3, Capulet approaches Juliet about getting married, not realizing she's already married. She kind of talks back a little bit and resists, and Capulet is as mean as any father in Shakespeare. He calls her baggage, and he calls her headstrong, and he calls her all these pejorative names. Well, now Juliet is obedient. And Capulet says, we'll to church tomorrow. We'll go to church tomorrow, and you're going to be married to Paris. Not Thursday, tomorrow. And Juliet obeys. Why does she obey? Because she has a plan. She can obey her father when she knows she's really not going to have to listen to him. So the first thing is the plan to fake her own death, which involves a Friar Lawrence potion. Secondly, that the wedding has been sped up to tomorrow, which means tonight, what does Juliet have to do? She has to take the potion. The most fascinating element in Act 4 to me, and I might argue the most fascinating moment in every act of the play, is Juliet's thinking. She's a much more interesting thinker than Romeo, and it's not even close. So here's this girl who's suddenly fallen in love with the man of her dreams, who's been able to figure out a way to marry him, spend one blissful night with him. And now she's this close to be able to spend the rest of her life with him if the potion plan works out. But obviously, it's not like the FDA approves of this potion. And she has all these conflicting thoughts. So here's what she says. She says, I have a faint cold fear thrills through my veins that almost freezes up the heat of life. I'll call them back again to comfort me. Nurse? What should she do here? My dismal scene I needs must act alone. How scary, right? Come, vial. What if this mixture do not work at all? So if the vial just is nothing, she said, shall I be married then tomorrow morning? No, No, this shall forbid it. Lie thou there. She lays down a dagger in case the poison doesn't work. That's really not wanting to marry Paris. You know you're not a good romantic partner if there's a backup suicide plan. She also talks to the dagger as thou, which is really interesting. What if it be a poison, which the friar subtly hath ministered to have me dead, lest in this marriage he should be dishonored? What if the friar's trying to cover his ass? Because it'll get out that he married Romeo and me, and then he's going to marry me in Paris. Well, maybe the friar's getting rid of me to cover himself because he married me before to Romeo. I fear it is. And then she's thinking in real time. You want to know one thing that makes Shakespeare special? He doesn't give us characters thoughts. He gives us characters thinking, what thinking looks like. I fear it is, and yet methinks it should not, for he hath still been tried a holy man. How if, when I am laid into the tomb, I wake before the time that Romeo come to redeem me? These are all the options, right? There's a fearful point. Shall I not then be stifled in the vault? Won't I die in the vault? To whose foul mouth no healthsome air breathes in, and there die strangled before my Romeo comes? Or, if I live, is it not very like the horrible conceit of death and night together with the terror of the place? Wouldn't it be horrifying if I live, but I'm like with a bunch of dead relatives in the vault? As in a vault, an ancient receptacle where for these many hundred years the bones of all my buried ancestors are packed? Where bloody Tybalt, yet but green in earth, lies festering in his shroud? Tybalt would have been there. Where, as they say, at some hours in the night spirits resort? Aren't there ghosts in vaults like that? Alack, alack, it is not like that I, so early waking, what with loathsome smells and shrieks like mandrakes torn out of the earth, that living mortals, hearing them, run mad. Or, another option, if I wake, shall I not be distraught, environed with all these hideous fears, and madly play with my forefathers' joints and pluck the mangled Tybalt from his shroud? Would I just go crazy in that environment, she asks? And in this rage, with some great kinsman's bone, as with a club, dash out my desperate brains? Like, take the bone of one of her relatives and commit suicide that way? Is that one of the options if she wakes in the tomb? Look, methinks I see my cousin's ghost seeking out Romeo, that did spit his body upon a rapier's point. Stay, Tybalt, stay. She imagines seeing Tybalt's ghost. Romeo, I come. This do I drink to thee. Again, I just appreciate Juliet thinks all the thoughts the audience would be thinking. What are all the possibilities with the stuff, the poison in this vial? Juliet thinks and entertains all of them, and then decisively decides to take it, realizing it's still, even without 100% certitude, the best of her options. The nurse goes to wake her up. The Capulets go to wake her up, and she's dead. And even though Lord Capulet calls her baggage and headstrong and all these names the day before, he is utterly despondent and depressed. She seems to be an only child. And he says, death lies on her like an untimely frost upon the sweetest flower of all the field. It's a really beautiful sentiment, particularly for someone who was such an ass the day before. And then no one talks about this. I don't know if it's in any movie or play versions of it because it's always edited out because it's weird. Of course there would be musicians showing up at the Capulet house the next morning. Of course there would be, because there's a wedding that's supposed to happen. These are wedding musicians. And I often think that because Shakespeare was raised by a glover, a guy who made gloves, he was aware of a sort of retail blue-collar work environment. The most classic example of it is in Hamlet, where after the death of a significant character, not only are there great speeches and dramatic moments, but he knows that there's going to be some guy with dirt under his fingernails whose job it is going to be digging the grave. So that guy gets an amazing scene. After the murder of Duncan early in Macbeth, of course there'd be a guy opening Macbeth's gate. He makes these people come alive. These characters in Romeo and Juliet aren't super well drawn. So Peter, one of the musicians, says, musicians, because my heart itself plays, my heart is full of woe, play me some merry dump to comfort me. They're on their way to play a wedding. Juliet and Paris's wedding. They learn that Juliet's dead. And they realize that now the gig might change. It might go from a wedding gig to a funeral gig, which means the playlist changes. Shakespeare is aware that as highly dramatic as Romeo and Juliet's circumstances are, something like the funeral of a kid, for certain people, it's a job, right? These guys might have a wedding the day before and a funeral this day. My wife and I are church musicians. And whether it's a wedding or a funeral, we're not saying we're like heartless, but we have a funeral binder and a wedding binder. It's two different binders, same church, same organization of how to do the music. Not to be heartless, but Shakespeare's just aware of the high drama of the moment, but he's also aware that there's people on the margins of society that are just living their life. And for these guys, it's a different gig. I'll play sad songs, I guess. Why not? They're unaffected by the drama of the moment. They're just wondering what songs to play. It's not essential to the play that you know that. I just think it's really, really interesting. And when people wonder why we pay attention to Shakespeare, that's how wide his vision of the world is. And I just think that's important to mention. So here are some things you could do with Act 4. Who's the most loving parent figure in the play? That's an interesting conversation. Students love judging adults. If you're a parent, you know that already. It can be one of the actual parents in the play, or the nurse, or Friar Lawrence, or the prince, or somebody else. 2, which parent figure causes the most damage in the play? Might be the same person. I don't know. 3, which 3 quotations stand out in Juliet's soliloquy before she swallows the potion? Which 3 specific moments? And then maybe dig into what do you think stands out to you about them? Anyway, I hope this helps you with Act 4. Good luck with Romeo and Juliet.